I was late. Not just fashionably late, not just a few minutes past the scheduled time, late in a way that had Madison smirking like she'd already won. Late in a way that made Sean sit back in his chair, arms crossed, radiating smug triumph, as if he were already drinking a toast to my downfall in his head. The courtroom doors creaked open as I stepped inside, and every eye turned toward me. Madison's attorney, a stiff-looking man in an expensive suit, adjusted his tie with a knowing glance at his client, as if to say, "This is already over." The judge exhaled sharply, displeased, but said nothing yet. I walked forward, calm, unhurried. A simple sweater, jeans, a pair of scuffed boots, everything about me screamed defeat. A man already broken. A man stripped of his pride and possessions. And Madison? Oh, she loved it. The moment my eyes met hers, she leaned in toward Sean, whispering something that made them both chuckle under their breath. I stopped beside my chair, meeting her gaze for just a second longer than necessary. Just enough time to let her believe she had won. "Mr. Reeves," the judge said, irritation creeping into his voice. "We were about to proceed without you." "Apologies, Your Honor," I said, my voice smooth, unbothered. "I had some last-minute business to attend to." Madison scoffed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, we figured you got lost on the way here," she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder, the picture of relaxed dominance. "Or maybe you just gave up?" Sean grinned beside her, flashing white teeth. The two of them were in sync, a perfect little power couple. I could see it in their eyes, the certainty that they had won, that today was just a formality, that after this, they'd walk out hand in hand, leaving me in the dust. I let the moment hang, let them soak in their false sense of security. Then, finally, I sat down and placed a thick folder on the table with deliberate precision. It made a soft thud as it landed, a sound that, for now, meant nothing to them. But soon? Oh, soon it would mean everything. Madison was still grinning when the judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Her attorney stood, buttoning his jacket with an air of practiced arrogance. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with the same self-assuredness that Madison wore like perfume. "Given Mr. Reeves' tardiness, I believe we can proceed swiftly. My client has been more than reasonable in her requests, ensuring a fair and amicable division of assets. I trust the court will see the merit in our proposed terms." The judge gave a slow, expectant nod. "Proceed." Madison shifted in her seat, sitting up straighter, exuding power. This was her moment, the culmination of months of calculated deceit, legal maneuvering, and manipulation. I said nothing. I just watched. To summarize, her attorney continued, "Mrs. Reeves has agreed to a 50-50 split of all disclosed marital assets. This includes the shared properties, investments, and—" A snort escaped me. Quiet, but just loud enough. Madison's head snapped toward me. Her carefully crafted smirk flickered. "Something amusing, Mr. Reeves?" the judge asked, already tired of my presence. I laced my fingers together, taking my time before speaking. "It's just fascinating, really, the way some people define fairness." Madison scoffed. "Oh, spare us, Logan," she said, rolling her eyes. "I don't know what you think you're going to pull here, but the numbers are the numbers. You're lucky I'm even letting you walk away with half." Half. That word. That tiny, infuriating word. Like she was giving me something. Like this wasn't money I had earned, businesses I had built, sacrifices I had made. I smiled, slow and measured, and tapped the folder in front of me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "before we finalize anything, I'd like to introduce some additional documentation for review." Madison's eyes narrowed, but she didn't look concerned, yet. Her attorney, however, frowned slightly. He didn't like surprises. "Good." The judge sighed but gestured for me to proceed. I slid the folder across the table, right into the hands of the court clerk. "Mr. Reeves," Madison's attorney said, tilting his head, "if this is some last-ditch attempt to dispute already agreed upon." "It's not a dispute," I cut in. "Just some clarifications." The clerk handed the documents to the judge, who began flipping through them. A beat of silence. Then another. Then his eyebrows lifted. Madison noticed. Her attorney noticed. "What exactly am I looking at, Mr. Reeves?" the judge asked, flipping another page. I leaned back in my chair, letting the tension build. "Just a detailed breakdown of recent asset transfers," I said casually. "Specifically, the ones made in the 3 weeks leading up to the divorce filing." The blood drained from Madison's face. Sean, who had been sitting with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won, suddenly wasn't smiling anymore. Her attorney recovered first. "Your Honor, these documents weren't previously disclosed." "Because I didn't feel the need to share them until now," I said smoothly. The judge kept reading. Then he stopped. His lips pressed into a thin line. He looked up, directly at Madison. "Mrs. Reeves," he said slowly, "it appears your husband divested the majority of his business assets into an external trust weeks before these proceedings began." The color vanished from her cheeks. "That can't be right," her attorney blurted, reaching for the documents. He scanned them, flipping pages faster and faster, his expression tightening. Sean stiffened beside Madison, his posture no longer relaxed. I watched as the realization dawned. She thought she had trapped me. She thought she had been careful, but I had been ahead of her the entire time. Madison's fingers twitched against the polished wood of the table. Her confident smirk? Gone. That insufferable air of superiority? Evaporating by the second. Sean, usually so relaxed, suddenly looked like a man sitting on a ticking time bomb, when he had just realized was wired beneath his chair. The judge tapped a page in the folder. "Mr. Reeves, can you clarify what we're looking at here?" I nodded, exhaling like this was just another business presentation. "Certainly, Your Honor. What you have in front of you is a timeline of asset transfers leading up to my wife's divorce filing. 3 weeks prior, I sold my controlling shares in my company for a generous sum. That money was then placed into an irrevocable trust, one managed by my brother." I paused for effect. "Meaning it is no longer legally considered a marital asset." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then Madison lurched forward, her voice rising. "That's a lie." The judge didn't even glance at her. He was still reading, his eyes moving over the documents, absorbing every carefully planted piece of information, every trap I had set for her. Her attorney, however, was already sweating. He flipped through the pages, his movements sharp and panicked. "Your Honor, this was not disclosed in our initial financial reports. We need time to it." "To what?" I cut in, tilting my head. "To realize you were playing checkers while I was playing chess?" Sean shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Madison turned on me, pure venom in her voice. "You did this on purpose." "Oh, you mean the same way you tried to blindside me by concealing assets you siphoned away?" I shot back. "The offshore accounts under shell corporations? The fake debts you fabricated to make it look like the money was never there in the first place." Her face twisted in shock. "Because she knew. She knew there was no way I should have known that." Sean inhaled sharply. I turned to him, letting my eyes linger. "Yeah, that's right. I know all about it." Madison whipped around to face him. "Did you tell him?" she hissed. Sean recoiled like she had slapped him. "Are you insane?" No. She didn't believe him. For the first time today, doubt flickered in her eyes. Good. Let her question everyone. Let her wonder how much of her flawless plan had been compromised before it even started. Her attorney cleared his throat, regaining some composure. "Your Honor, we request a delay to review these new documents." Madison grabbed his arm. "No. No delays. We can disprove this now. He's lying." The judge sighed deeply, rubbing his temples before giving her a sharp, unimpressed look. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, voice level, "it would appear that your husband was well within his rights to transfer these assets before your divorce filing. If these documents hold up, he is legally entitled to retain them outside of these proceedings." I felt the exact moment Madison realized she was drowning. All those months of scheming, backstabbing, and maneuvering, and in one instant, it had unraveled right in front of her. She wasn't taking half. She was taking nothing. And I was just getting started. Madison snapped. Her chair screeched against the courtroom floor as she lurched forward, both hands slamming down on the table. "This is bullsh*t," she spat, her voice raw with disbelief. Her attorney's eyes widened in horror. Madison. No. She whirled on him, her perfectly composed mask shattering. You said we had him. You said there was no way he could do this. I watched her unravel with the same level of detachment I'd show to a car wreck on the side of the road. Just a slow, inevitable collapse of a woman who thought she held the leash, only to realize the leash had been wrapped around her own neck the entire time. Sean, meanwhile, was gripping the armrest of his chair so hard his knuckles were turning white. He should have run when he had the chance. The judge's patience had officially evaporated. Mrs. Reeves, he said, tone flat and unforgiving, sit down. Now. She turned to him, lips parted as if she was about to argue, to demand that he fix this. But the look in his eyes, that was the look of a man who had already decided her fate. And so, for the first time in her miserable, manipulative life, Madison shut up and sat down. Her attorney was breathing fast, eyes darting across the pages in front of him like he was hoping, praying, begging to find a loophole. But there was none. I had made sure of that. The judge flipped to another section of the file, lips pressing together as he read. Then, his gaze lifted to meet mine. Mr. Reeves, he said, you claim your wife attempted to conceal marital assets prior to these proceedings. Do you have proof? I smiled. Of course. Another folder slid across the table. Another set of documents. More receipts, offshore transactions, forged liabilities, hidden accounts in her maiden name. I had everything. And the second her attorney opened that folder, he knew it. His face drained of color. Sean went rigid. Madison stopped breathing. You son of a b****, she whispered, voice shaking with rage. I tilted my head. Sorry, was I supposed to let you rob me blind? Maybe next time. Don't underestimate the idiot husband you thought you had wrapped around your finger. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Sean shifted beside her, sweat visible on his forehead now. He looked at her, then at me, then back at the folder, and I saw it. I saw the realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't just sleeping with another man's wife. He had backed the wrong horse. And I had just left them both to rot in the losing bet they had placed. The judge exhaled, shaking his head as he straightened in his seat. Given this new evidence, he said, flipping through the pages, the court will need to conduct a full review of Mrs. Reeves' financial disclosures. If what I'm seeing here holds up, there will be severe legal consequences for falsifying this information under oath. Madison gasped. Sean sat stone still. Her attorney was already rubbing his temples, as if trying to figure out how to salvage this train wreck. But there was no salvaging it. Because this hearing? It had just turned into Madison's funeral. The courtroom felt like it had been sucked dry of oxygen. Madison wasn't moving. Sean wasn't breathing. Her attorney was flipping pages so fast, it was like he thought he could outrun the inevitable. But the inevitable was already here. I leaned back in my chair, relaxed, the only person in this room who wasn't on the verge of a breakdown. I watched, detached, as Madison's carefully built empire of deception crumbled into dust right in front of her. And then, just as I had planned, the final dagger landed. Mrs. Reeves, the judge said, each word heavier than the last. Do you have any idea what the penalty is for knowingly concealing marital assets in a legal proceeding? She froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. The judge turned to her attorney, who looked like he was aging in real time. Counselor. Her lawyer was sweating through his shirt now. Your Honor, we would need time too. 5 years. Every single person in the room turned to the judge. His face was stone, unreadable, unforgiving. Up to 5 years in prison, he continued, for willful financial fraud in divorce proceedings. That's not including potential perjury charges, which, given these false statements in her initial financial affidavit, would also be viable. Madison looked like she'd been shot in the stomach. Her hands gripped the table, hard, her nails digging into the polished wood. Why, Your Honor? I wasn't trying to. The judge held up a hand, cutting her off. I suggest you stop talking, Mrs. Reeves. Immediately, Madison squeezed her eyes shut. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning. She had been so sure she was going to walk away from this with everything. My money, my house, my business, my dignity. Instead, she was on the verge of losing everything herself. And Sean, oh, he knew it too. I saw the exact moment he realized that he had hitched his entire future to a sinking ship. His legs started bouncing, his breathing quickened, and then he snapped. He turned toward Madison, his voice low, furious. You told me this was handled, he hissed under his breath. Madison's head whipped toward him, her eyes wild. You think I planned for this? She shot back, barely keeping her voice down. Sean's jaw clenched. You said he was stupid. You said he wouldn't fight back. What the hell have you gotten me into? Madison whispered something back, something desperate, something pleading, but I wasn't even listening. Because I had one last move left. I straightened in my seat, looking directly at the judge. Your Honor, I said, given the severity of these revelations, I'd like to amend my original position on the divorce settlement. Madison snapped her head toward me, pure panic flashing across her face. What? I cut her off, still speaking to the judge. Given the financial misconduct at play here, I'd like to formally request full ownership of all remaining joint assets, as well as an annulment of any spousal support previously under consideration. A full wipeout. No money. No house. No settlement. Madison would walk away from this with less than nothing. She made a choking sound, a noise like she was trying to form words but couldn't process what was happening fast enough. The judge nodded once. Given the circumstances, I find that reasonable. Madison finally snapped. No. Her voice cracked the courtroom like thunder. She shot to her feet so violently that her chair toppled backward, crashing against the floor. You can't do this. You can't just take everything. But she wasn't yelling at the judge. She was yelling at me. And all I did, I stood up, adjusted my sleeves, picked up my folder. Then, as I turned to leave, I leaned down, just close enough for only her to hear. Checkmate. And with that, I walked out of the courtroom, leaving her and Sean in the ruins of the kingdom they thought they'd built. The courtroom doors swung shut behind me, but I knew the chaos inside was far from over. I could still hear Madison's ragged breathing, the way her fury twisted into something desperate, something terrified. She wasn't just losing the money. She wasn't just losing the assets. She was losing control. And for someone like Madison, that was worse than death. I walked down the corridor, my pace steady, my heartbeat calm, the exact opposite of the storm I had just left in my wake. But then, the sound of heels slamming against the floor. Fast, desperate, coming closer. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Logan. I stopped. Let her come to me. Madison skidded to a stop beside me, her chest rising and falling like she had sprinted the entire way. Her hands were shaking, her perfectly tailored blazer now disheveled, her eyes wild. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw something I had never seen before. Real fear. She swallowed hard, her voice cracking. You can't just leave me like this. I turned to face her, calm, unbothered. I didn't leave you like this, Madison. You did this to yourself. Her fingers curled into fists. This isn't fair. I let out a short, amused breath. Fair. I repeated, tilting my head. You tried to rob me blind, manipulate the courts, hide my own assets from me, and set me up for financial ruin. It was just business. Logan, she blurted out, voice rising. I thought you'd be fine. I thought you had something else. I just stared at her. And then I laughed. A slow, deep, genuine laugh. Madison flinched. You thought I had something else? I repeated, amusement lacing my words. You spent the last 6 months plotting against me, and you didn't even know how much I was actually worth? She swallowed, her throat bobbing. That told me everything I needed to know. Madison had thought she was the mastermind, the strategist, the one in control, but she had never been playing on my level. And now, she was starting to understand that. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her voice smaller now. I just wanted to start over. With Sean. At his name, my expression turned to stone. With Sean. I repeated, my voice quiet but dangerous. She hesitated. It's not what you think, Logan. I took a slow step forward. She took a shaky step back. Not what I think? I said softly. You had a whole plan, Madison. You were going to take everything. Move in with him. Spend my money while I was left picking up the pieces. Am I wrong? Her lips pressed together. She said nothing. Because she couldn't. We both knew I was right. I was going to give you something, I murmured, my eyes never leaving hers. Her brows furrowed. What? Something to start over with, I said. Something to soften the blow. A golden parachute, so to speak. A flicker of hope crossed her face. She thought I was relenting. But then, I took one step closer and ripped that hope away. But after today, I said, my voice sharp as a blade, you get nothing. Her mouth parted, but no words came out. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Like I wasn't the man she had spent years underestimating. Because I wasn't. That man, the man who trusted her, who thought she was his partner, who believed in the vows they made, he didn't exist anymore. And Madison? She had made sure of that. Goodbye, Madison, I said quietly. Then I turned. And I walked away. I didn't look back. Not when Madison let out a shaky breath behind me. Not when I heard the tiny, disbelieving gasp that slipped from her lips. Not even when her heels clicked forward, like she was about to chase after me, before she stopped herself. She knew it wouldn't work. She knew that whatever power she once had over me was gone. The doors to the courthouse loomed ahead. Sunlight spilled through the glass, bright and free. I was one step away from walking out of this mess forever when a voice. Sharp. Panicked. Furious. Logan, wait. I let out a slow breath. My shoulders relaxed. I had been expecting this. Sean. I turned, and there he was, storming toward me like a man realizing he had just bet everything on a losing hand. I leaned against the wall, arms crossing lazily over my chest. Something on your mind? His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. You think this is funny? He snarled, stepping closer. You think this is some kind of game? I let out a short, amused breath. Oh, I think you thought it was a game, Sean. Right up until you lost. His nostrils flared. His fists clenched at his sides. You don't get it, he hissed. You think you just screwed over Madison? He shook his head, his lips twisting. No. You screwed me too. I raised an eyebrow. Did I? Yes, he snapped. Do you have any idea how much I put into this? How much time I spent getting her into position? And you, he gestured wildly at the courthouse doors. You just torched the entire F***king plan. A slow smile pulled at my lips. And there it was. The confession. He didn't even realize he had just said it out loud. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. You spent time getting her into position, huh? I echoed. So tell me, Sean, how early did you two start planning this? Sean froze. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see it. The panic, the regret, the slow, horrifying realization that he had just made a mistake. His lips parted, but I lifted a hand. Actually, don't answer that, I said smoothly. Because you already did. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen once, then turned it toward him. Sean's face went dead white. Audio recording. Time-stamped. Crystal clear. Everything he had just admitted saved. I watched his throat bob, his eyes flickering toward the courthouse doors, as if wondering whether he could still salvage this. He couldn't. I made sure of that. You, his voice shook with barely controlled rage. You think you're so smart. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, my smirk never faltering. No, Sean, I said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. I know I am. Then I brushed past him, stepping into the sunlight, leaving him standing there, trapped in the burning wreckage of the life he thought he had won. I stepped outside, breathing in the crisp, clean air of freedom. Behind me, chaos. Madison was still inside, no doubt grasping at straws, trying to salvage the unsalvageable. Sean. He was frozen in place, probably replaying the last 30 seconds in his head and realizing how badly he had just get himself over. Asterisk, asterisk. I should have kept walking. I should have gotten in my car, gone home, poured myself a drink, and watched their lives implode from a distance. But instead, I paused. And not because I had second thoughts. Not because I felt any lingering attachment to Madison or any anger toward Sean. I paused because I wasn't done yet. Because they weren't just going to lose. They were going to suffer. I leaned against the hood of my car, pulled out my phone, and made a call. 1 ring. 2. Logan. The voice on the other end was cool. Professional. Deadly efficient. Time to drop it, I said, my voice smooth. Everything we talked about. A pause. Then, a slow chuckle. Consider it done. I ended the call, slipping my phone back into my pocket, just in time to see Sean stumble out of the courthouse. His suit jacket was unbuttoned now, his tie loosened, his entire face a shade paler than before. He was walking fast, eyes darting around like a man who had just realized he wasn't safe anywhere. I watched him approach his car, fumbling for his keys. Then his phone buzzed. He froze. Slowly, his shaking hand pulled it from his pocket. I already knew what he was seeing. A breaking news alert. A leaked document. A full expose on how a certain business consultant had been orchestrating financial fraud alongside a high-powered corporate lawyer. Madison's name was in there. His name was in there. And the SEC? Oh, they were going to have a field day with this. Sean's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the pavement. I pushed off my car, walking toward him slow. Measured. You did this, he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I stopped just in front of him, tilting my head. You did this to yourself, I corrected. I just gave the right people a little push. His breathing turned ragged. You're insane. I smiled. No, I'm just better at this than you. Then, before he could say another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, drowning in the ruins of his own greed. As I walked toward my car, I didn't need to look back to know Sean was still standing there, his world crumbling in real time. The realization had just hit him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was bigger. This was career-ending, reputation-destroying, potentially criminal. I could hear the way his breath hitched, the faint scrape of his shoe against the pavement as he stumbled backward, like he was trying to physically escape what had just happened. But there was nowhere to run. He was trapped. I slid into my car, started the engine, and let the low rumble of it settle over me. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Not just because I had won, but because they had lost. And yet, as I reached for the gear shift, the courthouse doors slammed open again. Madison. I sighed. I should have known she wouldn't go down quietly. She stood there, heels digging into the concrete, hair slightly out of place, but her expression? Calculated. Not broken. Not panicked. That was the thing about Madison. She never stopped fighting. She stalked toward my car, stopping just short of the driver's side window. I rolled it down just enough to hear her last pathetic attempt at saving herself. Enjoy this little victory, Logan, she said, voice low, cold. You think this is over? I exhaled slowly, tilting my head. I don't think it's over, Madison. I know it is. Her jaw clenched. You ruined everything. I let out a soft, amused breath. No, I just made sure you didn't get away with ruining me. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. You think you've won just because you embarrassed me in court? Just because you humiliated Sean? You really believe I'm just going to? I cut her off with a dry chuckle. You still don't get it, do you? She narrowed her eyes. I leaned forward slightly. This isn't about court. This isn't about Sean. This isn't even about money anymore. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I let the silence stretch. Let her stew in it. Let the weight of her complete and total downfall settle over her. Then, I delivered the final blow. Check your phone. Her brows furrowed. But I could see it, the slight flicker of hesitation, the instinct to obey. And sure enough, after a few seconds, she did. She pulled her phone out of her bag, tapping the screen once. Then twice. Then, her entire face drained of color. I watched, entertained, as her fingers hovered, as her throat bobbed, as the last remnants of her confidence shattered. I already knew what she was looking at. The headlines, the leaked financial records, the scandal attached to her name, the sponsors pulling out, the law firm cutting ties, the state bar opening an investigation. Everything. She was done. You leaked this? She whispered, voice hollow. I smirked. I just gave the truth a little push. Her hands started shaking. Logan, she said, and for the first time in all of this, she actually sounded desperate. Not angry, not furious, just desperate. Please, she whispered. I held her gaze for a long moment. Let her think, just for a second, that there was a sliver of mercy left in me. Then, I shifted the car into drive, rolled up the window, and without another word, I left her standing there, drowning in the wreckage of her own making. I drove away without hesitation, leaving Madison in my rearview mirror, right where she belonged. But I wasn't going home. Not yet. There was one last loose end to tie up. I pulled into a parking lot a few blocks away, engine humming as I leaned back in my seat, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel. Then, I made the call. It rang once, twice. Then Logan. My brother's voice was calm, steady. Exactly the kind of person you trust to safeguard millions of dollars. Hey, I said smoothly. Everything in place? There was a slight pause. Then a quiet chuckle. You're asking me that? You know damn well it's in place. I exhaled slowly, a deep satisfaction settling over me. Good. Madison had thought she was going to walk away with half. Then, when the court case collapsed, she thought she could at least walk away with something. But here was the truth, she was walking away with nothing. Because I had already moved everything before she even saw it coming. Before she even had a chance to reach for my money, it had vanished into a network of trusts, investments, and holdings she would never touch. Sean had been a fool. Madison had been arrogant. But me? I had been prepared. Appreciate you, man, I said, my voice lighter than it had been in months. Drinks on me next time I'm in town. My brother laughed. Looking forward to it. I hung up, letting the silence settle. And for the first time since this all started, I felt free. The weight of betrayal, of anger, of revenge, it was gone. Madison and Sean would spend years trying to recover from this. They would claw and fight and scramble, but in the end, they had lost. And I had won. I smiled to myself, turned the key, and drove off into a future that was finally mine.